Previously on Impact.
That it's becoming an anxiety disorder is when you have then avoidance of those specific situations. You're now failing to socialize with other people. And especially depending on your age group, there's milestones that are associated with socializing with other people.
The question that I have is that how do we now attend mental health in adults? Because we have, I know, I always look at it in young people, but there are adults who are affected by this. And they try to bottle it up, and also men,
But now there's too much at this person. I can understand the stress so it's easier like to relate with if it's someone which has the capacity, yeah, this thing rather than someone on a total idea or a clue about what they're going through,
Good evening to everyone. I hope everyone is doing well. I hope everyone is doing fresh. My name is Sky Levese, and today we're going to talk about mental health. The one part three. And we have had an exciting journey since Friday, Saturday, and we're back again. The last round, round 3 is always the best. So today I still have my same guest. I still have Maxine, I still have Notolo. We're going to talk, and we are going to talk. Feel free to throw your questions in the comments and we will answer you. And we love answering questions because it shows that you're interacting. And what we are talking is penetrating. It's with A. So before we start today, we're going to have a little bit of recap from our guest of what we're talking about. Then they will enter and tell us what they have for us today. And today we are going to start with Unotolo, who's going to talk to us. Then we're going to follow up with Maxine. Then we're going to follow up with questions. Then, So I just hope everyone is ready and everyone is fresh. And let's get to it.
Evening, everyone. Evening. We did yesterday. We spoke about stress and we linked the relationship between stress and our health. So we defined stress as an emotional response to circumstances and the events that threaten us and challenge our coping abilities. And then we also looked at the 5 phases of stress, like in the process of stress. But we focused more on phase 1, which is encountering potential stresses. So there we find that we have different kinds of potential stresses. So we had universal events. These kind of stresses, they affect the majority of people in the society. And then we looked at personal events. These are kinds of stresses that are specific to a community or an individual. And then we had the third one, which is micro event stresses. So this one affects an individual on everyday basis. So basically that's what we did. And we also looked at other strategies that can be used towards stress. So we had the problem solving technique strategies, and we also had the avoidance coping strategy, and the last one was the social support group, which we highly recommended for people when you have stress. These are the kind of strategies that you can look up to and see which one can be best to help you. But we've suggested mostly the 1 year social support. So that's the recap about what we did yesterday.
Okay. That's nice. Thank you very much, Chad, for giving us a recap of what we were talking about yesterday. And it was very much interesting because we got even to answer some questions which were very much interesting. So thank you very much on that note. Now, Nokola, tell us about what you'll be talking about today, and you can take the floor. Thank you very much.
All right. So today we'll be talking about personality disorder. right? So we have different kinds of personality disorders. So it's a bit lengthy, but we'll try and go through and through them. So firstly, before we delve too much into the kinds of personality disorders that we have and which clusters do they fall from, we'll first have to define what is personality, right? So personality, it refers to patterns of thoughts and feelings and behavior that makes each one of us as individuals. So it's basically what we are. So that is a definition of personality. So there are also few points or things that I would like to highlight towards personality disorder. So we need to highlight that we behave fairly in predictable ways towards of our patterns, so it's either we are shy or we are selfish, so there's just a lot. And we need to know that personality doesn't change very much, né? But it depends as we go through different experiences in our lives and as our circumstances change. So basically, as we mature with time, our thinking, feelings and behavior, they do change. So now we are a bit flexible enough to learn from our past experiences and to change our behavior to cope with life more effectively. So we also need to also note that um people with personality disorders, they're more likely to find this more difficult, in terms of their patterns of thinking and feelings and behaving, which are more like it's a bit more difficult for people with lenses and personality disorders, uh, because the patterns of thinking and feeling and behavior, they change, so they might experience a limited range of emotions and attitude and behavior towards coping with their everyday life, so this usually makes things more difficult for them and other people, and just to connect with other people in general. So then, since I did say that we're going to look at the kind of personality disorders that we have. So we have, they're in clusters. Now, our personality disorders, we need to know that they are in clusters. So they are categorized, they're in groups. So we have the ones that fall under suspicious. We have that ones that fall under emotional and impulsive. And then we have the third cluster, which they fall under anxious. So it's only three clusters, but Maxine will take it over on the third cluster. And I'll focus mainly on the first and the second cluster. So on our first cluster under the suspicious one, we have paranoid, we have schizoid, we have schizotypal, and we have antisocial. And then on the second cluster under emotional and impulsive, we have borderline, we have histrionic, and we have narcissistic. So I will go through now the symptoms or the signs to show if someone is having a paranoid personality disorder. This is the type of signs that will show, So I'll give those kind and those kind of symptoms. But please, even though through these symptoms, may people avoid trying to diagnose themselves. If you feel like, okay, I feel like I fit on this one, I fit on this one, please just go and see a specialist so that they can give you a full assessment, and for them to make a final judgment to go to, okay, you are diagnosed with this type. So whatever is your issue right now, don't diagnose yourself. So I want people to avoid themselves from diagnosing themselves, because now I once did this on my first Lentuzana. My first studies while I was studying psychology. When I read about these things, I found myself diagnosing myself when I was going through the textbook. I'm like, you know what, I'm falling under here. You know what, I'm falling under here, but let's just avoid that tonight. So under the first cluster, the 1A under suspicious, We are going to now look at the symptoms. Sorry about that. So now we are going to look at the symptoms of a paranoid personality disorder. So most people who have this type of disorder, we find that they find it very difficult to trust other people, So they also find it hard to confide in people or even their friends. So they always watch others closely. They are looking for signs of betrayal and hostility. So usually these ones they suspect, usually the ones that suspect in their relationship. So they suspect their partners of being unfaithful, and yet they still have no evidence. And they read threats and usually danger. So which others don't see in everyday situations. So they always try to look for threats and dangers into situations that we don't even see that much. And then we're gonna move to the schizoid personality disorder now. So the kinds of symptoms or signs that they show is that they are interested in forming close relationships with other people, including their own family members. you know so sometimes they feel that their relationships, they interfere with their freedom, and then now it tends to cause problems for them. So these ones, they also prefer to be alone on their own thoughts, and they choose to live their lives without interference from others. So they get little pleasure from life. They have little interest in intimacy and stuff, and they're usually emotional cold towards others. So basically they just like their own space. They just want to be on their own and be alone. And then we're going to move now to a schizotypal personality disorder. So their signs are, these ones, they find making close relationships extremely difficult. So it's very difficult for them to make close relationships. So they think and express their selves in ways that they find odd, you know, and they behave in ways that others find eccentric. They believe they can read minds and that they have special powers of the sixth sense. So they believe that's what they believe. I know us as ladies, we have this thing which we have the sixth sense, intuition. So I wish now we have a schizotypal personality disorder. It's just one of the symptoms. The symptoms. And then they also feel anxious and tense with others, when they do not share their beliefs. So they feel intense if you don't share the same idea or concepts or beliefs with them. So they're very anxious and paranoid in social in social situations. And then now we're gonna move to our second cluster. So and our second cluster, sorry, I bet. We have a histrionic personality disorder. So one of the type of symptoms that they show is that they feel very uncomfortable if they're not the center of attention. So they feel much more at ease. Also, they feel that they have to entertain people. So hence they very feel uncomfortable if they're not the center of attraction. So usually they get a reputation for being dramatic and over emotional. And yet here it strikes the ladies. We are we're a bit dramatic and over emotional at times. But hey, it doesn't mean which as ladies we we are suffering from this mental and personality disorder. I'm not saying Gucci, they're not ladies who are not suffering from it. They are, but you see how easy we can diagnose ourselves. But yeah, that's not the case. So sometimes they feel dependent on the approval of others, and they can be easily influenced by others as well. And then the other one that we have now is the narcissistic personality disorder. So these ones, yeah, they believe that there are special reasons. They are the special reasons to make different, you know and I mean to make a difference, and they have a fragile self-esteem, so they rely on others to recognize their worth and their own needs. So they have their self-esteem, their self-esteem, sorry, rather, it's a bit fragile because they rely on other people, to actually recognize their worth and their needs. So they also feel upset if others ignore them, or they don't give them what they feel they deserve. And then they resent other people's successes. They put their own needs above other people's and demand that they do too. So they are also to be seen as selfish, you know, and they do take advantage of other people. So those are the symptoms of all the personality disorders that yeah that I said I was going to cover tonight. So yeah, then Maxine now she'll take us through the third cluster about
Okay.
yeah.
Okay. That latest part, we'll come back to it. Maxine, take it over.
Okay. So, the next cluster for personality disorders that we have is the anxious cluster. Ne? So we all have things and people that we don't like. No, they make us anxious. But then, if you see that you're having a lot of the following symptoms and they appear a lot, it might be something that they use at the doctors to diagnose you with an anxious cluster type personality. So the first one we're going to go through is the avoidant personality disorder. So here you are basically someone who worries constantly. So what you're worrying about is being found out or being rejected. Even when you haven't necessarily done anything, you're worrying about, oh, they're going to find out something about me and then they're going to reject me. You also worry about being ridiculed or shamed by other people. These people tend to avoid relationships and friendships, sometimes even intimacy, because they're afraid of rejection. And then these people also feel lonely and isolated, and then they tend to feel inferior to other people as well. And also, they're often reluctant to try new activities because they're afraid that they're going to embarrass themselves. So that's the first personality type under the anxious cluster. And then the next one under the anxious cluster is the dependent personality disorder. So here it's normal for us to feel that we want love and care and affection from other people, né? And a healthy balance basically means that you depend on yourself, but you also depend on other people to just get through life. So these people are the ones who they find themselves that their feelings and thoughts about needing others become so overwhelming that they impact their daily life, and their relationships. And then that's when we're like, okay, this person might have the dependent personality disorder. So these people feel needy. They often feel weak and they are unable to make decisions about day-to-day things, like normal things that other people can easily make decisions on. They are struggling to make those decisions without getting help or support from other people around them. These people also allow and require others to assume responsibility for many areas of their lives. So things that you would usually take responsibility for, that you're going to be like, okay, I want to be independent, I need to do these things for myself. These people are often relying on and requiring even other people to do this. They feel that it is almost their right for other people to do these things for them. And then the next point, under dependent personality disorder, these people often tend to agree with things that you feel are wrong or that you dislike, because they're afraid basically to be left out. So if the whole crowd is saying, yeah, let's go on with this, they're also going to be like, yes, not because they agree, but because they're afraid of being rejected by those people. They also are very afraid to be left alone or to be left to fend for themselves. So they always want to be with someone who's going to share the responsibility, someone who's going to do these things for them, as opposed to them doing it for themselves. They often have low self-confidence, and they also see other people as being much more capable than they are. So they are not doing any of these things because they don't think that they have the capability, and they don't have the self-confidence either to be like, I can do this, and I can approach this issue and solve it the way it needs to be solved. And then the last personality disorder under the anxious cluster is obsessive compulsive personality disorder, ne? Which is not the same as obsessive compulsive disorder. Obsessive compulsive disorder is an anxiety disorder, and then this one is under the anxious cluster of personality disorders. So here, this one is describing a form of behavior other than a type of personality. So OCD describes the behavior, where the OCPD describes the type of personality. So people with OCPD often need to keep everything in order and under control. They feel basically out of control if everything is not the way that they want it to be. These people often set unrealistic high standards for themselves and for other people as well. They think that their way is the best way of doing things. They worry about themselves or about making mistakes, and they do this so much that it actually affects their ability to do what they need to do properly. These people also have a tendency rather to end up feeling very anxious if things are not going the way that they want them to go. So if something is not going according to their plan, they start panicking because they are feeling very anxious. So that's basically it under our personality disorders. And then the next segment of the night is just going to be us discussing a few eating disorders. So we chose eating disorders because we feel like it's a topic that is not very widely addressed. Ne? So I'm just going to give some key facts before I go into each individual eating disorder. So basically, when we describe eating disorders, we define them as abnormal patterns of eating and exercising that severely interfere with day-to-day life. So the most common eating disorders are anorexia nervosa, bulimia nervosa, and binge eating disorder. So eating disorders, contrary to popular belief, can happen in both males and females of any age. So it doesn't really matter. You can get an eating disorder. And then there's not any one specific reason that anyone gets an eating disorder. They basically happen because of a different variety and combination of factors. So the first thing to do if you're suspecting that you may have an eating disorder is go to your doctor usually. So go to the clinic, you go to the hospital, whichever one is more accessible, and then they will test you there and basically determine whether or not you do have an eating disorder. So now we're going to get into the specific eating disorders. Ne? So the first one that we're going to talk about is anorexia nervosa. So these people often set themselves goals of losing weight, ne? But then they lose so much weight that they become underweight for their age and for their height. And then often they become unwell. They often get sick, and most people who don't get help tend to eventually die from this eating disorder. So the early symptoms that you may have this eating disorder is you're afraid to put on weight, or you weigh yourself constantly. You think about food all the time, or you feel anxious at meal times. You start to restrict the amount of food that you're eating. You feel out of control, basically, when you eat. This is for anorexia nervosa. No? And then the next one is bulimia nervosa. And then we're going to combine it with binge eating disorder as well. So people with bulimia nervosa or binge eating disorder, they regularly binge eat. Most people with these conditions are very concerned about their weight and their body shape and size. People with bulimia nervosa, however, compensate for their binge eating by repeatedly controlling their weight in extreme ways. So they'll make themselves throw up, they'll take laxatives, they'll exercise, they'll overdo it basically to compensate for the fact that they are binge eating so much. Where binge eating and purging, they end up being symptoms of both bulimia nervosa and anorexia nervosa. But the difference is people with bulimia nervosa are not extremely underweight like people with anorexia. So the difference between someone with anorexia nervosa and bulimia nervosa is that the one with anorexia will be severely underweight, where the one with bulimia can be normal weight for their height and for their age. So the next topic we're going to talk about, the next rather eating disorder, rather not food, is avoidant or restrictive food intake disorder. So people with this disorder basically have food phobias, and they avoid certain foods, but they're not necessarily worried about their body shape or their weight. They lose a lot of weight, or develop nutritional deficiencies. And then you'll find that some of them with this condition can't even eat certain foods at all. So when this happens, they need supplements or they need to be fed through a tube basically in order for them to live, because they are denying their bodies of certain food groups that their bodies need to survive. So if you think that you may have any of these eating disorders, these are the symptoms that you usually present with. So again, you're afraid with putting on weight, or you weigh yourself all the time. You think about food all the time, and you're anxious at meal times. You've started to restrict how much food you eat. For those with binge eating and bulimia nervosa, they overeat uncontrollably. They're often ashamed about how they eat. Often you find that they go and eat in very hidden places. So they'll sneak food somewhere and eat it there. And then they'll feel so guilty about doing that that the ones with bulimia will make themselves then throw that food up. They'll make themselves vomit that food up, or they'll take laxatives to get rid of that food. And then the ones with binge eating disorder will basically get in a cycle where I eat too much, or I eat this thing I'm not supposed to eat. I feel bad. Then I'm like, I'm never going to do it again. But then the guilt that I'm feeling causes me to then go and eat something else that I'm not supposed to be eating. And then it creates a cycle. Other symptoms also include hoarding food to binge on later. So you go in someone's room and you find in their cupboards it's just full of snacks and all these foods, because they're planning to eat this food later. Because again, they feel ashamed of their eating habits, so they can't do it in public. So they have to hide this food to eat somewhere else. Those with bulimia nervosa, again, they'll make themselves vomit after eating. They'll take laxatives to lose weight. People with eating disorders often worry too much about how they look. They check themselves consistently in the mirror. They start to even lie about what they eat and how much they eat. You exercise too much, and then you end up getting to a point where you either feel cold all the time, or you're feeling weak and lightheaded all the time because your body is not getting all the nutrients that it needs. And then if you are a girl or a woman who has began menstruating, often when you do develop an eating disorder, your menstruation stops because your body is not receiving all the nutrients it has enough for you to be going through that period. So you don't have to have all these symptoms to be diagnosed. You can have some of them, a few of them, but again, you have to go to a medical professional for them to check you and make sure that you actually experiencing an eating disorder. So again, there's no one cause of eating disorders, and there's no simple reason why they happen. But research rather suggests that it's a combination of genetic factors. Again, it could be something that is hereditary, combined with biological factors such as the way that your brain works, the chemical balances in your brain, and then also psychological factors, which is basically how some people have a certain view of what the perfect body is. So those things also can contribute to whether or not you have an eating disorder. And then also cultural factors. So in some cultures, it's more appropriate to be thin, where in other cultures, it's more appropriate to be a bit bigger. So those things as well can contribute to they can contribute to eating disorders. So according to research, some other things that make you more at risk for developing an eating disorder include having feelings of low self-esteem and worthlessness, living in a Western culture in which being thin is considered an ideal body shape, living in an urban area, participating in activities that are basically concerned about your body image, having a history of strict dieting and body dissatisfaction, rather, having lived in an environment where leanness or obesity has been a concern. So if other people in your family have been struggling with such things, this makes it a risk factor. So you're more likely than an average person to get an eating disorder, as well as experiencing depression or loneliness, being a perfectionist, being impulsive, or having difficulty managing emotions can lead to emotional eating, which can then also lead to an eating disorder. Also, migrating from a developing country to a more Western culture. So maybe in a country where there's less food security to a country where there's food in abundance can also lead to things like eating disorder. Also, things like experiencing stressful life changes, as well as having experienced physical, emotional, or even sexual abuse, because then those people are avoiding dealing with all the trauma that is associated with that by using food, and then that also can lead to an eating disorder. So, yeah, that is just basically a summary of the eating disorders. and what causes them, as well as the symptoms that are associated with each of them.
Yeah, yeah. I had a lot of stuff. I had a lot of stuff, and I was just smiling to myself. I'm like, you said I must not diagnose anyone, but some things what I'm thinking, I'm like, he hasn't. You know, when especially when Unotolo was talking about the drama thing, and overreacting and overthinking. I'm like, no, man, Maxine, why did you say this? Why did you tell me that? Things like that. Because I'm thinking like, man, if I knew, I'm like, oh, go get help, man. I know maybe it's not me, but yeah, it was very much informative. And also about that big and lean, because now in African culture, it's something. If I see somebody with somewhere opposite, then we think something else, or it depends with where we are,
Hmm.
when we are located. So it's
Mm,
very much it's very much powerful. It's very much powerful that we get to talk about such things and we get to inform one another. And because some of the things I didn't know, like I'm like, okay, fine. If you eat too much, I saw people who throw up. How can you throw up food? Who does that? Like in whose house? First of all, is in whose house you're doing that? So it's very much interesting on how we get to understand and see this. It's
Mm.
interesting. It's very much interesting. Mm, mm,
And I
mm,
think the
mm,
one
mm.
thing that I forgot to mention is that people with anorexia bulimia, I mean anorexia nervosa, anorexia bulimia, people with anorexia nervosa have a tendency to, not necessarily a tendency, this is actually a scientific fact, that they have this thing where their perception is distorted. So when they look in the mirror, what they see and what we see is very different. So we see someone who is thin and who's literally just skin and bones, and they see themselves. I think they said,
it's big.
if I remember correctly, according to research, almost three times
Mm,
more rather bigger than what they actually are. So when I see them, I just see skin and bones. They're seeing that times three, which is what perpetuates the eating disorder, because they're like, yo, I'm actually so
mm.
fat. When in reality, this person is malnourished and they're actually putting their body through a lot.
That's very much true. That's very much true. And we have a question. Let's try to answer the question before we continue. It's a really long question, which we can look at and see.
Okay. All right. So
Mm.
I don't necessarily think in that instance it's, I feel like it can be a yes and a no, because okay, definitely exercising, because exercising does amazing things for your body. Also, it releases endorphins in your brain, which makes you feel good, and it basically helps to improve your mood, and your emotional well-being. However, if the situation is one that calls for more action, it can be classified as um, kind of avoiding the situation. And again, the avoidance is not a permanent thing. It's literally just a thing for just now until I'm ready to address the situation. So it also depends on why you're exercising. Is it an everyday thing now that you use every time you think about the stressful situation? Or is it just something that you do in your time just to make yourself feel good? So it really, I think it depends on the circumstances, and also depends on if you're using that as a way to not think about or not address what it is that's stressing you out. I don't know if Oli has anything to add.
Nah, it's all good.
Oh, that's awesome. That's really much awesome. Before we reach closure. I don't know if there is somebody who has something else to say. We're going to have.
Actually,
Mm-hmm.
yeah, I've noticed, Lana Guti. Shane has been talking a lot. I've noticed Guti, I forgot some of two important, actually, two important
Mm-hmm.
personality disorders. You know,
Yeah, yeah. You
so
can try your best to pass it real quick. He will give you 2 minutes. He will give
okay,
you two
to me,
minutes
it's,
so that
thank you so much. Thank you so much. So we were talking. It's under the second cluster, under the emotional and impulsive cluster, right? So we also have an antisocial personality disorder. You know, this one usually it's being spotted mostly on criminals or people who just commit crime. But it doesn't mean it's mainly focused on them. even though you're not a criminal, but most criminals they fall under this personality disorder. So the kind of symptoms or signs that they show is that they act impulsively and recklessly, without even considering the consequences of of the situation towards other people. They sometimes behave dangerously and sometimes illegally. They behave in ways that are unpleasant for others, and they sometimes do things that, even though they may hurt people, they just get what they want, and they always put their needs above others. And they also they feel no sense of guilt, if if they mistreat others, so they don't even feel guilty. They show no signs of remorse, rather. And they can be very irritable and aggressive and get easy to fight, so lava nje bangene nje empini siyalwa nje, they get easily to fight. And they are very usually they are easily bored, and they may find it difficult to hold on down to a job for a very long time, so they have to do something new all the time, and then they believe that the only strong way to survive is that they must do whatever it takes that will lead them to a successful life, because if they don't grab the opportunity, others will, so hence I've said before, which is being classified under Ntuzana. Usually this type of personality disorder, it's mostly likely found to come out criminals, and hence they say they usually, some of them, they end up having a criminal record. And yeah, and some of them, they can even be diagnosis of this disorder before the age of 15. So before the age of 15, some of them, they go through this. And then the second, or rather the last one, yeah, is the borderline personality. So borderline personality, it's simply it's a term that we can refer to as being emotionally unstable. So it's an emotional unstable personality disorder, that is borderline personality disorder. So the kinds of symptoms that other people show is that they feel that uh, they don't have the strong sense of who they really are, and how the other people and how other people describe them. They suffer from mood swings, so like their mood would switch like from an intense emotion to another very quickly within a second, and then usually they often show like anger, and then they have a bit brief of psychotic episodes. So they usually hear voices, or they see things that we don't do, that other people don't see, or that we don't see, rather. So they also do things in an impulse, and they regret later, unfortunately. And they also have episodes of harming themselves, and even leading to taking up their own lives. So sad. So they also have a history of stormy or broken relationships. So that means their relationships, yeah, are not stable. And they have a tendency to cling onto every damaged relationship because they are terrified to being alone. So you find people like this, bahlala in a bad relationship or a very damaging relationship, because they're scared if I hop out of this relationship, I'll be left alone. So they have that kind of terror, they'll be left alone. So yeah.
Yo, am I here on the comments, but you're getting too personal. I don't know which personal, but yeah, yeah, hitting the final nail. That's all I can say. Yeah, hitting the final nail. So you said
Yeah.
I missed the question, so I'm gonna try to with the see if I answer the question. I think here's the question. If I think we missed the question, then we can answer this question, and we can wrap up.
Okay. So I definitely think that yes, your self-esteem can be lowered by your surroundings, because the people that we are, like basically it's affected by our physical surroundings, our social environment, so all these different things that contribute to make who we are. But um, your self-esteem and your personality are not the same thing. So self-esteem has to do with me, how I see myself. Am I able to like my cognitive self, do I realize, okay, this is me, these are my strengths, these are my weaknesses, this is what I'm able to do, these are my capabilities. Like self-esteem is how you see yourself, whereas personality is kind of the person that you are throughout time. So today I am this person, tomorrow I'm still going to be the same person. The personality that I have remains the same, whereas self-esteem is the way that I'm feeling about myself, which is definitely affected by our surroundings.
Okay. Doctor, is there something you want to say?
No. She said it all. Yeah.
Okay, that's awesome. That's awesome. That's very much. That's very much awesome. Yeah, man. I think we had an incredible weekend. We talked about a lot of things. We covered a lot of things, and we
Mm-hmm.
answered questions. And yeah, it was very much interesting. I'm satisfied. At one side, I feel like what, there's more I can do about this in my own private life and my own community, and
Mm.
it has made me to look at life differently because we have this thing of when we see people, we judge them, or
Mm.
when somebody doing something to you, and like, I learn you but you might not know something behind the action or something behind what's going on
Mm,
between that person. So basically, especially when it comes to me, because I usually deal with young people. So now it has helped me to look at it in a different way. That what, before you start to lounge and say yo Zokshire, whatever the case may be, try to observe or try. I'm not saying diagnose. Try to observe and be understanding. Yeah,
Mm.
yes. And see, we see,
mm,
some other things are just there, but maybe parents are, or whatever the case may be, because sometimes such things happen, and we can
mm,
help and bridge the gap, between parents understanding their
definitely.
children better, okay, there's a problem, or
Mm.
adults or spouse, whatever the case may be. And when we do that, it is going to be fine. I don't know if we have just any last words before we close. Any last words? Or yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so Mina, my last words will be that let's avoid being judgmental towards people who are suffering with
Mm,
personality disorder because we are adding a stigma to them. So now some of them they're even scared of voicing out or trying to seek for help because now they have this mentality behind them. Yo, they would classify me or view me as a muntu ohlanga. So we need
mm,
to avoid being judgmental instead of using that energy of being judgmental. Let's use that energy of helping the next person.
definitely. And I was really going to say something similar to be like, we really need to work on eradicating the stigma around mental health illnesses, because that's the reason why people are not able to come out and be like, this is actually what I'm going through, this is what I have, and help the next person who might be going through the same thing, because we've attached, you will see, mental illness, we associated with it as this and bad things and bad
Mm,
behavior. So we really need to work on doing that, especially in the Black community. I know
mm.
Black people have this belief that mental health illnesses are not for us. It's like a white people thing. Black people don't go through that. When the reality is, a
True.
lot of mental health doesn't discriminate. It doesn't see color. It doesn't see age. It doesn't see race. It doesn't see any of those things. So we need to really work on that so that we create a society where it's acceptable to be the person that you are and acceptable to ask for help so that you can get better.
True.
That's all. That's very much awesome. So, guys, I just want to say thank you very much for joining us, for blessing us with the powerful content. And I know that people have learned and benefited from what we have heard today. And may everything in your career path be great, be light, and continue to change life. It must not end here, but in your personal life and the people around you, they must sense that what, I am here and I'm going to change life. So from me, I just want to say thank you and good night to everyone who was watching us. And yeah, bye.
Thank you.
Bye, everyone.
People can think that I'm sneaky, manipulative.
Reckless all the time.
I have no skills or ambitions.
Can I catch it?
I think there's something really wrong with the term borderline personality disorder because it suggests that maybe I'm a bad person or that I don't even have a personality.
I hear voices with my schizophrenia, and people think it's easy to just challenge the voices and tell yourself to ignore these voices.
This image of being in a film such as One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest, that you lost control, that's also everybody's misconception of what bipolar disorder is.
The reality of my illness is that it can be really hard work.
You can have mood dips, you can have mood highs, but it can be controlled.
Every day I have to challenge myself and my voices and tell myself that I'm better than my voices.
I am very fortunate to have the support of my wife, and she stood there and stood up for me when other people wouldn't.
I have a good friend who I've known for years. He then told me he'd be there with me throughout it all.
You can have a great job. I've had an excellent career.
You have family, you can have friends.
So you can be functioning, you can live a healthy life if you have the right help.